Hey guys, welcome back to another video. And today we're gonna try ourselves in photo engraving. After the last video we figured out normal slate engraving with this particular unit. Photo engraving is now the next step. And after a bit of trial and error I figured out a way to do it completely for free without needing to pay for any software. So without further ado, let's get right in. The first step in photo engraving is to choose and prepare the picture. It is important to use one that has even lighting. There is very little dynamic range in the engraving. It's just two colors after all, the background color and white. So you can't use a picture that has very bright spots or very hard shadows in it. You can, obviously, but you're gonna lose all the detail in these parts. And I would hardly recommend to cut out the subject you want to engrave because it greatly reduces it greatly improves the quality of the final engraving. So there are several options to cut out the subjects. First of all, just look at your phone. Look at if your phone has an option to do that. I have an Samsung S21 FE and it has the lasso feature, which just lets you click on anything and it just cuts it out with magic, and it works really, really well. Just Google if your phone has a similar feature or try it out. If you don't mind giving all your data to the SAC, you can use Segment Anything. That's an online AI color tool made by Meta AI, and it also works quite well, and you just use it online on any computer. For manual cutter, you can use GIMP, which is a free image manipulation software, and it has some manual cutout features. Just note that it is super tedious to do it this way, and I only would recommend it for very, very simple shapes. So, before we start with our photo engraving though, we need to do a DPI test. That is, we need to measure the actual size of our engraving of a laser dot, and then go onto the ImageR website, and they have a chart where you can put in your laser dot size and then choose the correct DPI value so that every dot on the picture that it spits out corresponds to a dot of your laser. Now the manufacturer gives you a number. It's 0.05 millimeters. However, that is suspiciously small, and I saw even some high-end lasers that claim they have a larger dot, so I don't really believe it. So I'm just gonna test it, connect it. I have this focused at the exact distance, and then I'm just gonna pulse the laser once so that it makes a dot on the MDF, and then we're gonna see how big the dot is. So now you can see there's the tiniest of dots right here. Now we need to measure this with some calipers, or ideally would be a micrometer screw, because that's actually too small for a pair of calipers, but I don't have that. So I think like this should be kinda equal. It's actually easier to see this in the camera. And if you look at the calipers, we are at 0.2 millimeters. That's what I would say is where it matches up. So we know that our dot is actually a lot larger than it was advertised, and we can choose an appropriate DPI setting. So now that we have determined the dot size for a laser, we can go onto the ImageR website and then go onto Scan Gap. And then what we have here, we have a chart where we can put in our scan gap in millimeters and then have the corresponding DPI setting. We're actually on the lower side here, so I'm just gonna try out 127 DPI, which corresponds to my laser dot size. And now that we've determined our dot size and we have a laser set up and we have a picture cut out, we can import it into the software. So I'm just gonna drag it in. I'm just gonna drag it in as a color image, and then we have my doggo here. Now we can start with the processing. Here you could crop it just right in the software. If it wasn't properly cropped, with mine I don't need to. Then we need to resize. This is very important. This is gonna determine the end size of our engraving. I'm just gonna type in my DPI here. Then I'm gonna set this to millimeters, and I want it to be 80 millimeters high. So I'm just gonna drop in 80. fixed aspect ratio should be left on because otherwise your image is distorted. And now it automatically set the width to 53 millimeters, 80 millimeters tall. And the percent settings here, I actually don't really know what this means. Just leave it at 100. And then click OK. Now you have the end sight set. You cannot change it in the Laser GRBL software later. You will need to come back to this to change it again. So make sure you leave this browser tab open, because to use the software for free you have only 3 daily uploads. Then you could just add text if you want to. I'm gonna choose some material. Then go on to Norton and Norton Black Slate. This is what I'm using for this engraving. If you want to use wood, then just choose that in the options. And now it spits out a preview. Here you can use the preview with the material. However, in my experience, this never was really accurate for me, so I just ignore it. Then, usually, this picture here doesn't really correspond to the actual output of the software. So, just click on download, download this as a PNG, and then open whatever the software spits out. And just check if this matches up. So in this case it actually did match up. So maybe the DPI setting did something. Now let's put this into Laser GRBL. Now we are in Laser GRBL and let's open the file we just created. Then here, just don't freak out if this looks terrible, use the pass through option. Then it's just gonna use all the option from the Laser GRBL software. Then we can use auto trim image to trim it down perfectly if it's a little bit off, and then click on next. Now, in the last video I told you to do a power test to see which power and which speed values would match up. For me, 1250 and 30% is a good matchup. Here's the size. Here you could use an offset so that it's not in the middle. This is usually used if you want to put some text below your engraving so you can position it. But we don't need that, so we turn on engraving. And then we have a picture here. It looks like it has a pretty low resolution, but it should match up with our engraver. So let's try engrave it once and see just how it turns out. And here we are with the first finished engraving. And I really like how it turns out. You can see that the resolution is low. All the dots are pretty large, but again, they should be corresponding to the engraver. And maybe this engraver just doesn't have very good resolution. I'm still gonna try out another piece with twice the, I'm assuming a lower dot size. So I'm raising the DPI. I'm gonna tell you what that is to see how it turns out. But again, the brightness and the contrast all seem to be set very well by the software, because even though the dot sizes are quite large, I can still see a lot of detail in the picture. Like you can clearly make out that this comes from the original picture. So I'm gonna try another test with more DPI and see how that turns out. So now we are back in the image software, and I have my higher resolution picture here. So I ran into a bit of an issue where I had to actually re-upload it. You can see I'm down to one upload, because what I think happens if you click resize and I raise the resolution, it uses not the original image as a baseline, it uses the last image. So basically I had a low resolution image and then it tried to increase the resolution of the low resolution image instead of taking the original one. So it looked like crap and I had to re-upload it. I don't know why it does this, or if this is happening in the paid version or if this was a bug, but if you have similar issues, you may need to just re-upload it. I've now set it to 254 dpi and the same height as before. And we're gonna look at the downloaded image. And I think as far as this, it's pretty fine. So we're gonna just chuck this into Laser GRBL here. download the latest image, use auto trim, all the same settings. You can see it's gonna take over the DPI and the size, and the power settings were okay. And now I'm clicking on create, and you can see we have a much higher resolution image. So let's engrave this and see how it turns out. So here we have the result of our second engraving, and it also turned out very nice. You can see if I compare it to the other one, we do have quite a bit more detail, and it looks brighter because it has more dots per inch. That's what we changed. But it's still at a point where there is enough detail in the picture, I would say, and it's not overly overbright. This, I think, is a very nice result, and that also means that you can use a bit of a higher resolution than the engraver would allow, so to speak, because the dot size doesn't actually match, but it still makes it work, and it still turns out very nice. Just as a last addition, if your picture turns out to be overexposed, so to speak, so there's too much white, you can adjust all these parameters in the software here. So if you go onto advanced, if it isn't already open, if you go onto advanced on the left here, you have several options, and you can adjust, let's say, the brightness. So if your end result just has too much white, not enough detail, you can reduce the brightness, and then it will set this picture here. You can see I can lower it quite a bit. That's too much, so you can find sort of the sweet spot. Just look at the output image. We can now download this and then maybe compare them. This was the one before, and this is the with less brightness. This is the one we had before. You can see there's a lot less dots on it, but that's because we reduced the brightness, and in the actual final engraving, this should give you then more detail in the final print. You need to play around it with your particular engraver, and then you will find out good settings to use and how this should look, so that in the end it turns out looking well on the slate engraving. That was it for this video. All the results, I think, were very nice. I'm really happy that it works even with such an inexpensive engraver. The quality obviously is probably gonna be a bit higher if you use a high-end engraver that has less tolerance. First of all, in the laser dot itself, like it has a smaller laser. Also in the carriage, because the carriage in this is very flimsy. I'm actually very surprised that it works at all. So I think you can be happy if you get results like these with such an inexpensive engraver. And it's super cheap to do it because the slate isn't very expensive, and it's only the engraving time. The one with the higher resolution took about 20 minutes, and I think to get pictures like these that basically last forever unless you drop it for such little money is very nice. That was it. I hope you found the video interesting and you learned something. If you did, then consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like, and then I will see you on the next one. Bye bye.